Captain of Industry just had its huge update 4, bringing with it all new enhanced train systems, bridges, and even amphibious vehicles. They also released the first DLC focused entirely on expanding trains even further. So let's take a look at all things trains. In Captain of Industry, trains are a very useful mid-game upgrade, allowing you to transport vast amounts of resources across the entire map at high speed. They allow you to build factories spanning the full length of the map without having to worry about belts or trucks ferrying everything back and forth. However, before you can get to advanced full-sized factories, you first need to build your very first rails, stations, and train depot. Rails first, since they are super simple. To build rails, you need rail parts and gravel. You just need an assembly tier 3 or better fed with concrete and steel and you're all set. I'd advise sticking a unit storage 3 on the end of this, since when you're building large amounts of rails, it doesn't hurt to keep a large stockpile to speed things along. Plus, the rest pit is relatively cheap for the amount you get, so it's not going to gobble up all of your resources, provided your steel and concrete supply is fairly robust. Gravel is made by putting rock through a crusher, so stick one near one of your mines and process any rock into gravel. Normally, you'd probably just be dumping this rock, so it's a great way to make use of a waste product. And just the same as rail parts, stick a storage tier 3 on the end to keep a healthy stockpile. When placing rails, the controls look quite overwhelming, but they're actually pretty intuitive. You select your starting point and then just move your cursor wherever you want to go, and the tool will find the best path it can to wherever your cursor is. You'll notice that rails will appear in one of 3 colours: blue, yellow, and red. These indicate how sharp the corner is, and this will dictate how fast trains can move when using that section of rail. If you can help it, especially for longer routes, blue is always preferable to ensure trains are moving at the highest speeds possible, thus ensuring a steady flow of goods alongside high fuel efficiency. You can change the maximum angle by pressing this button or F on your keyboard. Just be aware that the larger angle will make rail building a little bit more difficult, so always play for the map and space that you have, and be sure to plan ahead with rails in mind when building your factory. As for general tips when you're building your rail network, the main one I have for you is to have, at the very least, parallel rails. This means you have 2 sets of rails right next to each other going in opposite directions, and if you want to change the direction of a track, just use the set direction tool. Whilst it may be very tempting to have a single lane going back and forth to save on some materials, this will almost immediately cause trouble once you have more than one train running at once. You'll end up with traffic jams, trains stuck waiting, and generally a huge drop in efficiency. Parallel tracks don't solve everything, but it makes trains run so much smoother and is well worth the added cost. On the topic of parallel rails, parallel stations are also a really good idea. Getting them off of the main track so they don't clog up your main rails is so important to ensure a steady flow of traffic, so absolutely do this for every single station without exception. I'd also ensure you're adding plenty of rail crossings where needed. You're still going to need trucks, so allowing them to cross your rails will be incredibly important in allowing them to perform their jobs without having to take giant detours. Try to place them anywhere high traffic, and if you notice a spot where a lot of trucks are travelling around your rails, maybe add some more crossings to sort things out. If you have super busy rails and crossings aren't cutting it, you can also elevate your rails, either just the rails themselves or using the newly added bridges. This will allow trucks to travel back and forth underneath your trains, so you don't even need to wait for a gap to cross, but does require more space and materials, so there is a trade-off. Find what works best for you and your map and your factory, since this really isn't a one-size-fits-all. And whilst we're here, we might as well do a speedrun of what each of these tools does. Set no stop zones allows you to highlight parts of the rail in red, which tells all trains to never stop covering that part of the track. This can be useful for keeping junctions clear so trains don't end up queuing and blocking movement, resulting in total gridlock. Set exclusive zones allows you to create zones on your track that can only be occupied by one train at a time. This can be useful if you have a bridge with only one two-way track on it to ensure that trains don't enter at the same time and become stuck, or any other scenario where you wouldn't want 2 trains close to each other. Modify pillars allows you to add and remove pillars from elevated rails. This is useful both for aesthetics but also keeping the ground clear underneath for any vehicles or buildings. Modify waypoints allows you to add or remove waypoints from your rails. This is quite a niche tool, but essentially allows you to decide what route you want trains to take. For example, if there are 2 ways to get to the next station, but you want them to take route B to keep route A open for whatever reason, add a waypoint on route B and add a stop between your 2 stations to ensure it takes that route. Like I said, this is super duper niche, so it's really one of those tools that you'll only use a handful of time during your game, but still useful to know. Now you can build rails, you'll need somewhere for them to actually lead to, and that's where stations come in. A station is technically this small building, and you can then place modules next to them to allow your trains to pick up and drop off certain goods. The main ones you'll want to worry about are the same as the 3 transports you're most often using, so flat, loose and fluid, also known here as unit, loose and fluid, both of which are actually my nicknames. Anywhooms, these 3 modules will allow you to load or unload goods from your trains. They can be connected to with transports just like any other storage, as well as having their own fairly small internal storage, so it will move items quickly to and from train carriages, allowing trains to move on nice and quick. I'd advise placing storage as buffers nearby to these modules, just to ensure they can be filled or emptied as quickly as possible, so they're always ready for arriving trains. I'd also advise leaving enough space for trucks to get through to give them access to that storage, so that means a 3-tile gap that's 3 tiles tall, or something like this. With all of this in mind, I'm sure you can see how stations can be used to move goods around your factory, but I'll show you some examples anyway. So here we can see my iron, steel and copper smelting setup, and as you can see, I have stations set up for every single good they need and produce. Granted, not all of these are in use just yet, but still, never hurts to be prepared. However, one train that is running is my construction factory supply. This runs through to the coast to pick up rubber, before coming back for iron, steel and copper, before looping around to collect concrete, before dropping off everything at the factory and starting the loop again. Yes, I know I'm missing wood. I kind of forgot about trees this save, but I'm working on it, I promise. You may also notice that I've tried to place the modules in my construction factory so they line up with those on my pickup stations. This isn't technically always necessary for reasons I'll cover shortly, but it does allow your trains to pull into stations neatly, ensuring that the rest of your rails are clear. Alongside moving goods on and off of your trains, stations are also how you fuel your trains, and this will vary based on what train you're working with. For most early train setups, I'd advise sticking to diesel trains as they only require a single fuel source to keep them going, whereas steam locomotives require both coal and water. Plus, diesel trains are a little faster in a straight line, require less workers, maintenance, fuel per movement, and create less pollution, but it's mainly what you have lots of. By all means, if your factory is a lot better at producing coal and water than diesel, then go for steam, but personally, I'm always running out of coal, so this is usually how I do it. Either way, all you need is a refueling module, and whenever your train stops there, it'll fuel itself back up. To tell your train where to go, you'll need to create a line from the train lines menu. From here, you can create new lines, and hitting add stop will allow you to click on each stop, adding them to that route. Obviously, you'll want to work out the most efficient route so trains aren't going back and forth more than necessary, but you can drag stops around if you need, so the main thing is getting them all selected. This is also why it's so important to name every single station you place, as it'll make building and adjusting lines so much easier. You can also tweak various settings for when trains should visit certain stations, what they should do there, and when to depart. The simplest version of this is adding a station with a refueling module and hitting this fuel icon, meaning only trains low on fuel will visit that station. Doing this means you don't need to spread refueling modules absolutely everywhere and can instead place a few and have them serve a bunch of trains. Depart conditions are also fairly simple, as they are based either on time or the train containing a certain amount of resources. The simplest version of this is setting any delivery train to only leave when empty of any selected products. This means the train will only leave when any of its carriages are empty of goods, so they're not going back and forth when their home factory doesn't need it. Station groups seems complicated, but really aren't. All this does is give the train two options when making that stop. This is useful if you have multiple trains running the same resource, or even multiple resource pickups that can both be used for the same thing. Again, this sounds complicated, but all it's doing is giving the train two options when making that stop. It will pick whichever station is free before moving on to whatever's next. Lastly, filters, which again seem quite complex, but really aren't. These essentially tell the train what to do when it reaches that stop. You can tell it just to load up to ensure it doesn't accidentally unload any resources if there happens to be a compatible module at the pickup station. You can also tell it to load or unload specific resources if you only want it to get certain resources rather than picking up anything compatible. I want to stress that for early trains, you can ignore more or less all of these settings. Refueling is pretty useful all of the time, but aside from that, you really don't need to mess with most of these settings until your factory gets truly out of control. Chances are you'll know exactly when you need to use these settings when you see your trains doing something weird, so now everything has been explained, you'll know just how to fix it. And one last tip before we actually get building some trains, you should at the very least name every single line so if you get an error, you know what you're dealing with. And you can also set line colors and icons for some more added fun. Okay, now you've built your rails, set up some stations and lines to move goods around, you are finally ready to build your first train. To do this, you'll need a train depot connected to your rail network. Clicking on this, a new train will take you to the Train Designer menu. From here, you can select which locomotives and wagons you want on your train. Locomotives will of course depend on whatever you want to use for fuel, but early on, you're looking at diesel or steam, so just pick whichever you prefer. You then want to add all the wagons you need, and whilst trains can be more or less as long as you want, provided you have enough depot extensions, I'd advise sticking to 4 or 5. Any more than this, and trains are not only quite unwieldy, making stations quite difficult to place, but they're also quite slow to get up to speed, resulting in slow transport and poor fuel efficiency. This is only in the early game, mind you. Later on when you have nuclear or electric trains, they tend to deal with it a lot better, but this is a beginner's guide, so I'm assuming you haven't got nuclear trains yet. I would also advise adding filters to each wagon from this screen. This allows you to dictate which goods can be placed in each wagon, as otherwise wagons will fill themselves with whatever the first loading module they pack next to is holding. It's a bit of a pain in the ass trying to empty trains once they fill up with the wrong goods, so try not to let this happen if you can by setting filters when designing your trains. Once your train is ready, ensure you assign it to the correct line and set it to be built. Provided you supply everything the depot needs, you'll have a new train out on the rails in no time. When a train is running its route for the first time, it can be a good idea to keep an eye on it to ensure you've set everything up correctly, but after that it'll go around and around till the end of time, provided you leave your PC running for that long. And that really does cover just about everything you could need to know about trains, but as a little bonus for sticking around till the end, why don't we have a good old-fashioned drag race to see who's the fastest. But now we know the fastest, I want to know which train is your favourite. Do you respect the old-timey style of the steam locomotives, or are you a fan of the futuristic aesthetic of the nuclear train? Let me know in the comments below, like the video if you did, subscribe for more, and if you want more Captain of Industry content, then check out this video all about getting started with your very first factory.